The heavy iron gates slammed shut, sealing off the warmth of my childhood home. I stared at my phone screen. Account disabled. It was 25 degrees below zero, and a massive blizzard was descending, but the frost was not the deadliest thing tonight. It was the betrayal of my father choosing my 18th birthday to exile me. If a homeless woman's scarred hand had not pulled me back from the abyss, I would have been a frozen obituary by morning. My name is Lillian Fairbanks, and the last thing I saw before the heavy oak door severed my life in two was the reflection of the crystal chandelier shimmering in my stepmother's eyes. Inside, the grand foyer of our Aspen estate smelled of roasted rosemary lamb and expensive cedar polish. It was the scent of safety, the scent of a life I had known for exactly 18 years. Outside, the air smelled like nothing. It was a vacuum, a void of ice and wind that waited to strip the heat from my bones. I stood there, clutching the handle of a suitcase I had not packed. It was a Louis Vuitton trunk, vintage, leather-bound, and utterly impractical for the weather. It was my birthday gift. "It is a Fairbanks tradition." "Lillian," Serena said. Her voice was smooth, devoid of edges, like the surface of a frozen lake. She stood by the open door, the warmth of the house rushing past her shoulders and escaping into the night. Wasted. She wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost $3,000. The color of heavy cream. She looked impeccable. She looked like a murderer who had not yet bloodied her hands. "Your father did it. His father did it. On the 18th birthday. The bird leaves the nest. You have been too coddled. Darling, you need to learn the value of grit." I looked down at the suitcase. "Serena, it is 25 degrees below zero out there. The news said a blizzard is coming. Just let me stay until morning." "Adversity does not wait for good weather," she replied, checking her manicured nails. "Adversity is the teacher." My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. This had to be a joke, a cruel, twisted, rich person hazing ritual. I looked up toward the mezzanine, the second-floor landing that overlooked the foyer. The railing was mahogany, polished to a shine that looked wet under the lights. "Dad?" I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the cathedral ceilings. My father, Richard Fairbanks, was there. He stood in the shadows of the upper hallway, just out of the direct light of the chandelier. He was wearing his velvet smoking jacket, the one I had bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. In his right hand, he held a crystal tumbler of Pinot Noir. I knew the label. It was the 1996 vintage, opened specially for tonight, for my birthday dinner, the dinner I was not going to eat. He did not look at me. He looked at the painting on the opposite wall, an abstract splash of red and black that he had paid $50,000 for at an auction in Geneva. "Dad, please," I said, my voice cracking. "Tell her this is crazy. I have nowhere to go." He took a sip of wine. I saw his throat move as he swallowed. He swirled the red liquid in the glass, watching the legs of the wine drip down the crystal. He was a statue of cowardice. "Richard believes in the process," Serena said. Stepping closer to me, her perfume, something floral and overpowering, assaulted my senses. "He knows this is what is best for you. He loves you enough to let you go." "Dad!" I screamed this time. "Look at me!" He turned his back. He actually turned his back and walked away, disappearing into the master bedroom suite. The soft click of his door closing echoed through the silent house like a gunshot. The denial in my chest was so thick I could taste it. It tasted like bile. He did not want to do this. I told myself that immediately. Serena had made him. She had twisted his arm, threatened him, or manipulated him with one of her hysterical episodes that she hid so well from the public. My father was a weak man, yes, but he was not a monster. He just managed. He was being managed by her. "Time to go, Lillian," Serena said. She did not shove me violently. That would have been too pedestrian for a woman of her social standing. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder and applied firm, steady pressure. I was too stunned to resist. I stumbled backward across the threshold. The cold hit me instantly. It wasn't just cold. It was a physical blow. The air in Aspen at this altitude during a storm feels solid, like walking into a wall of dry ice. My breath was instantly snatched away. "Good luck," Serena said. She slammed the door. I heard the heavy deadbolt slide into place. Then, a second later, a digital chirp cut through the wind. I stared at the keypad mounted on the brick column next to the door. The small light turned from green to a pulsating, angry red. System armed. Mode. Intruder. I stood on the heated stone of the front porch for a moment, the only circle of warmth left in the world. I punched in the code. 1908, my birthday. Error. I tried my father's birthday. Error. I tried the master override code. Error. A robotic voice spoke from the intercom, loud enough to be heard over the rising wind. Access denied. Perimeter breach imminent. Law enforcement will be notified in 60 seconds. She had deleted me. In the span of 5 minutes, I had gone from daughter to trespasser. I backed away from the door, the reality of the situation settling over me like a heavy, wet blanket. I looked at the house. It was a fortress of stone and glass, glowing with golden light. I could see the silhouette of the maid moving in the dining room, clearing the table set for 3. The fire was roaring in the great room. It looked like a postcard of the American dream, and I was the smudge on the lens that had been wiped away. I grabbed the handle of the suitcase and dragged it down the driveway. The heated pavers ended at the gate, and beyond that, the world was white. The iron gates were already closed. Usually, they would open automatically when they sensed a person leaving, but tonight they remained stubbornly shut. I had to squeeze through the small pedestrian gap at the side, pushing my suitcase through first, then shimmying my body between the freezing metal bars. When I stepped onto the public road, the wind knocked me sideways. The storm was not just coming, it was here. The weather reports had called it the storm of the decade, predicting 40 inches of snow in 24 hours. I looked down at my clothes. I was wearing jeans, boots, and a wool coat over a cashmere sweater. It was an outfit meant for a quick dash from a car to a restaurant, not for survival in the wilderness. I had a hat in my pocket and pulled it on. Desperate to cover my ears, I dragged the suitcase to the side of the road and sat on it for a second, trying to think. My hands were already shaking. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out what I had. I had my phone, dead signal. The storm often knocked out the towers up here in the mountains. Or maybe Serena had canceled my service along with my access codes. I had a wallet. Inside was $240 in cash, my emergency fund. I had my debit card, but earlier, when I had tried to buy a coffee in town, it had been declined. I assumed it was a glitch then. Now I knew better. And I had a key. It was a heavy, old-fashioned iron skeleton key. It belonged to the old hunting cabin on the north ridge of the property. The estate was massive, over 300 acres of forest and mountain terrain. The cabin was a relic from my grandfather's time, a place my father rarely visited because it lacked Wi-Fi and underfloor heating, but I loved it. I used to go there in the summers to read. It had a wood stove, a propane heater, and thick log walls. It was about 2 miles away. 2 miles. In the summer, that was a pleasant 40-minute hike. Tonight, in a blizzard, with snow accumulating at a rate of 3 inches per hour. It was an expedition, but it was the only place. I couldn't walk to town. The main road was 6 miles down the mountain, and the winding asphalt would be a sheet of black ice. Cars wouldn't be running in this weather. If I stayed on the road, the plows might not see me until they buried me. The cabin was the only choice. It was my sanctuary. "Dad knows I will go there," I whispered to the wind. The sound of my own voice was swallowed instantly. "He knows. He will come get me in the morning. He just needs to let Serena cool down. He is doing this to appease her." I clung to that thought. I built a fortress around it in my mind. My father was not a bad man. He was just a man who loved a difficult woman. He probably thought I had a car coming. Maybe he thought a friend was picking me up. He didn't know I was walking. If he knew I was walking, he would run out here in his slippers to save me. I was his little girl. I was the only thing left of my mother. I stood up, leaving the suitcase behind. I couldn't drag 50 pounds of designer luggage through 2 feet of snow. I opened it quickly, the wind ripping the lid back. It was filled with old clothes, things I hadn't worn since I was 14, rags. It was another insult. I grabbed a thick scarf and wrapped it around my face, leaving the Louis Vuitton trunk to be buried by the snow. I stepped off the road and into the tree line. The forest was a nightmare of shadows and whipping white powder. The pines groaned under the weight of the wind, their branches thrashing like skeletal arms. The snow was already up to my shins. Every step was a battle. Lift, push, sink, lift, push, sink. 10 minutes in. My toes began to numb. 20 minutes in. I couldn't feel my nose. I kept my head down, squinting against the stinging ice crystals. I knew the path by heart, or at least I thought I did, but the snow had erased the trail. I was navigating by landmarks, the twisted oak tree, the large boulder that looked like a sleeping bear. The sudden dip in the terrain where the creek ran. I fell. My foot caught on a hidden root, and I went down hard, face first into the drift. The cold burned my skin like fire. I lay there for a moment, the wind howling over me like a freight train. It would be so easy to just stay here. The snow was surprisingly soft. If I closed my eyes, the cold stopped hurting and started feeling like a heavy, warm blanket. No, I pushed myself up. He is waiting for you to fail, I told myself. Serena is waiting for you to come crawling back and beg. You will not beg. I forced myself to move. I thought about the cabin. I visualized the cast iron stove. I knew there was a stack of seasoned firewood on the porch. I knew there was a propane tank for the backup heater. I could start a fire. I could wrap myself in the moth-eaten wool blanket stored in the cedar chest. I could wait out the storm. In the morning, the sun would come out. The sky would be that piercing, innocent blue that only exists after a snowstorm. My father would drive his Range Rover up the access trail. He would find me drinking tea, safe and alive. He would cry. He would apologize. He would realize that Serena had gone too far this time. This would be the breaking point for them. By kicking me out, she had actually set me free and destroyed her own marriage. This thought gave me a surge of adrenaline. I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. Every step I took toward that cabin was a step toward reclaiming my father. I trudged on. The wind chill was dropping. It had to be nearly 35 degrees below zero now. My eyelashes were freezing together. I had to keep rubbing my eyes to see. Through the swirling white chaos, I saw a shape. It was a sharp, angular shadow against the gray backdrop of the storm. The roofline, the cabin. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees buckle. It was there. It was standing. It was shelter. I made it, I gasped, the air searing my lungs. Dad, I made it. I picked up my pace, my frozen legs moving with renewed purpose. I was only 100 yards away. I could see the porch railing now. I could see the stone chimney. It looked dark and cold, but soon it would be glowing with life. I pulled the iron key from my pocket, clutching it so tight the metal bit into my palm. I didn't see the figure crouching in the brush to my left. The visibility was near zero, and the wind was deafening. I was focused entirely on the cabin, on the promise of the door that key would open. I didn't see the movement in the snow. I didn't hear the crunch of boots that weren't mine. I was 10 steps away from the clearing when the shadow detached itself from the trees. I barely had time to scream before something heavy and hard slammed into me, tackling me into the deep snow. The world spun. Sky, snow, trees, all mixed into a blur of vertigo. I hit the ground with a thud that knocked the wind out of me. Panic exploded in my chest. A bear? A mountain lion? I thrashed, trying to roll over, but a weight pinned me down. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, a hand, smelling of wood smoke and old dirt, clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream. I looked up, terrified, into eyes that were wild and fierce, framed by matted gray hair that whipped in the wind. but that is a story for the next breath. For now, I was alive, I was freezing, and I was no longer alone in the dark. The snow bit into my cheek like 1,000 tiny glass shards as I was ground into the frozen earth. The weight on top of me was absolute, heavy and smelling of wet wool, wood smoke, and the stale, unmistakable odor of unwashed skin. I tried to scream, but a hand clamped over my mouth. It was a rough hand, the leather of the glove worn thin, pressing my lips against my teeth until I tasted the copper tang of my own blood. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Terrified and bird-like, I kicked out, my boots finding no purchase in the deep powder. I was 18 years old, freezing to death, and now I was being murdered 200 yards from safety. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh through the panic. "Quiet," a voice hissed. It wasn't a man's voice. It was low, raspy, damaged by years of screaming at invisible demons, or maybe just from breathing in the cold mountain air for too long. "Stop moving or you die. Do not make me knock you out. Girl, I will do it." I froze. The threat was specific and grounded. The pressure on my back eased slightly, just enough for me to twist my head. The world was a gray blur of whipping snow, but the face hovering inches from mine was terrifyingly distinct. It was Mad Martha. Everyone in Aspen knew her. She was part of the landscape, like the overpriced boutiques and the heated sidewalks. But she was the shadow they tried to scrub away. She pushed a shopping cart with a wobbly wheel down Main Street, muttering about numbers and conspiracies. We threw coins at her feet to make ourselves feel better about our $5,000 ski jackets. And now, she was on top of me, her eyes wide and white in the darkness, staring with a focus that didn't look mad at all. It looked terrified. "Let me go," I muffled against her hand, the words barely audible. "The cabin I have to go to the cabin." "No cabin," she spat, her breath clouding between us. "No cabin for you. Not tonight." She dragged me backward. She was surprisingly strong, her grip on my collar like iron. I fought her then. Panic overrode reason. She was insane. She was keeping me out here in the storm. She was going to kill me with exposure while babbling about her delusions. That cabin was my father's property. It had a heater. It had walls. It was life. I dug my heels in and shoved her. I managed to break her grip for a second and scrambled onto my hands and knees, gasping for air. "Get away from me! You are crazy! My father will kill you if you touch me!" Martha didn't lunge at me again. Instead, she dropped to her knees in the snow, frantically digging into the layers of rags she wore. "Your father?" She laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "Your father is the reason I am here. Look at it!" She shoved something into my face. It was a black plastic box, about the size of a brick, with a small digital screen and a long metal probe extending from the top. It looked industrial. It looked like something a hazardous materials team would use, not something a homeless woman would keep next to her half-eaten sandwiches. I squinted at the screen. The green backlight was flickering in the cold, but the numbers were racing upward. 300, 400, 500. "What is that?" I screamed over the wind. "Gas detector," Martha yelled back, her voice clear and authoritative, shedding the crazy lady persona like a heavy coat. "Combustible gas indicator, standard issue for pipeline inspections. Do you see the needle? Do you see it dancing?" She pointed the metal probe toward the cabin. The device let out a high-pitched, rhythmic chirping sound that cut through the howl of the blizzard. "Beep, beep, beep." "The wind is blowing south," she shouted, grabbing my shoulder and forcing me to look at the dark silhouette of the cabin. "It is pushing the plume right at us. That cabin is not a shelter. Lillian Fairbanks. It is a bomb." I shook my head, the cold making my thoughts sluggish. No, that is impossible. It is just a hunting cabin. It has a wood stove." "The chimney is capped," Martha said. She was speaking fast, her words precise. "I saw them 2 hours ago. A man in a blue parka. He went up on the roof. He shoved a bladder bag down the flue and inflated it, sealed it tight. Then he went to the external tank and bypassed the regulator on the propane line. He opened the valve 100%. I stared at her. The details were too specific. A bladder bag? Regulator bypass? Why would anyone do that? I whispered. To kill the rat without damaging the trap, Martha said grimly. The gas is heavier than air. It has been filling that cabin for 2 hours. It is pooling on the floor, rising up to the windows. The moment you strike a match, or flip a light switch, or even just walk in there with the static electricity on your wool coat. She made an expanding gesture with her hands. Boom. Or, if you are lucky, you just fall asleep and never wake up. Carbon monoxide poisoning mixed with direct propane inhalation. A quiet death. Looks like an accident. Looks like the rich girl forgot to open the flue before she lit the fire. You are lying, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The cold was seeping into my marrow now, making my teeth chatter so hard I could barely speak. My dad gave me the key. He wouldn't... Your dad isn't the one who bought the industrial sealant at the hardware store this morning, Martha said. She looked at the device again. The beeping was getting faster. We need to move. The mixture is too rich. If the pilot light on the water heater tries to cycle... She didn't finish the sentence. We were staring at the cabin. It stood there, dark and stoic against the white fury of the storm. It looked so peaceful. It looked like the only safe place in the world. Then, the darkness broke. It wasn't a Hollywood explosion. There was no massive fireball that reached the sky. It was a dull, heavy whump sound, like a giant hand slamming a car door underground. The windows of the cabin blew out simultaneously. Shards of glass sprayed into the snow, invisible in the storm, but audible as they tinkled against the trees. A tongue of blue and orange fire licked out of the front door frame, illuminating the swirling snowflakes for a heartbeat, turning them into falling sparks. The roof lifted, just an inch or two, and then settled back down with a groan of tortured wood. The fire died almost instantly, suffocated by the lack of oxygen inside the now vacated space or perhaps snuffing itself out in the vacuum it created. The blizzard swallowed the light back up, but the smell reached us a second later. The acrid, chemical stench of burnt propane and scorched timber. I sat there in the snow, my mouth open, the scream dying in my throat before it even began. If I had been 5 minutes faster, if I hadn't stopped to catch my breath, if Martha hadn't tackled me, I would be inside that blue flame. I would be part of the debris. See, Martha whispered. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the cabin with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. It is a rat trap, and you, little girl, were the rat. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to process the impossible geometry of what I had just witnessed. My father stood on the balcony. He held his wine. He watched me leave. He knew I was coming here. It was the only place I could go. The logic was cold and mathematical. He didn't just kick me out to teach me a lesson about grit. He sent me to the slaughterhouse. Why? I choked out. The tears that welled up in my eyes froze instantly on my lashes. Why would he do this? I am his daughter. Martha grabbed my arm again, hauling me to my feet. The urgency was back in her voice. Because dead daughters do not inherit trust funds. Lillian. But tragedies? Tragedies are very profitable, and grieving fathers gather a lot of sympathy. She shook me, hard. Wake up! The shock will kill you faster than the cold. You need to move. That explosion might have been small, but someone might have heard, or someone might be watching from the road to make sure the job is done. Watching? I repeated dumbly. The man in the blue parka, Martha said. He drove a black truck. He parked down by the service road. If he sees you alive, he will not leave it to the gas next time. We have to disappear. I looked back at the cabin one last time. It was just a dark hulk now, smoke pouring from the broken windows, disappearing into the white night. That was my childhood. That was my hope. It was all smoke and broken glass. The girl who walked out of the mansion gates an hour ago, holding a Louis Vuitton suitcase and a heart full of excuses for her father. died in that explosion. I felt her die. She burned up in that flash of blue fire. The person standing in the snow now was something else, something colder. Where? I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was steady. Where do we go? I have nowhere. Martha adjusted her scarf, hiding the lower half of her face. She looked at me, assessing my expensive coat, my useless boots, my frozen hands. Then she nodded, as if she had made a decision. I have a place, she said. It is not pretty. It smells like rot and rust, but it is warm, and the monsters in your family do not know it exists. She turned and began to trudge away from the road, deeper into the forest, away from the cabin and away from the town. She didn't wait to see if I was following. She knew I had no choice. I took one step, then another. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move. I followed the hunched figure of the town pariah into the darkness. Behind me, the wind howled through the shattered windows of the cabin, sounding like 1,000 ghosts screaming my name. I didn't look back. I stepped into the shadow of the trees, leaving my footprints to be filled by the falling snow, erasing Lillian Fairbanks from the face of the earth. The wind died the moment the heavy steel hatch clanged shut above us. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and smelled of damp concrete and old grease. We were underground. Martha had led me through a maze of service roads to a snow-buried drainage culvert, and from there into the bowels of what I realized was an abandoned Colorado Department of Transportation maintenance bunker. It was a relic from the Cold War era, forgotten by the city, but repurposed by the woman standing before me. She struck a match. The flare of phosphorus was blinding in the pitch black. And then the warm, yellow glow of a kerosene lantern flooded the space. It was not the den of a madwoman. It was a command center. The walls were lined with taped-up newspapers, maps of Aspen, and printed spreadsheets. There were stacks of legal pads, neat and orderly, rising like towers from a makeshift desk made of cinder blocks and a wooden door. In the corner, a camping stove sat next to a sleeping bag raised off the cold floor on a pallet. It was dry. It was warm. It was safe. "Sit," Martha commanded, pointing to a folding chair covered in wool blankets. I collapsed rather than sat. My legs had ceased to feel like part of my body. They were just numb. Heavy stumps. I watched as Martha moved with an efficiency that betrayed her ragged appearance. She lit the camp stove, the blue flame hissing to life. A smaller, controlled version of the fire that had just consumed my future. She opened a can of tomato soup, poured it into a small pot, and added water from a plastic jug. "Do not sleep," she said sharply, not looking at me. "Hypothermia is seductive. It tells you to close your eyes. If you do, your heart stops. Watch the flame." Lillian. I watched the flame. I watched her hands. Now that we were out of the storm, I saw them clearly. They were rough, yes, and stained with the grime of street life, but the fingers were long and dexterous. They were not the hands of someone who raved at the moon. They were the hands of someone who dissected things. She handed me a tin mug. The metal was hot against my frozen palms. The pain of the heat was excruciating, a stinging burn that made me gasp. But I held on. I needed the pain. It told me I was still in a body. "Drink," she said. Slowly. The soup was salty and metallic, but it tasted like life itself. As the warmth spread through my chest, the shivering began to subside, replaced by a dull, aching exhaustion. I looked around the room again, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The papers on the wall I recognized faces. There was the mayor, there was the local sheriff, and there, in the center of a complex web of red marker lines, was a photo of my father. "Who are you?" I asked. My voice was a rasp, stripped raw by the cold air. "You are not just a homeless woman. You are not Mad Martha." She sat on a crate opposite me, unwinding the scarf from her face. Her features were sharp, her eyes intelligent and weary. Under the layers of grime, there was a dignity that the streets had not managed to scrub away. Martha Galloway, she said. The name meant nothing to me, and she saw that. She let out a short, bitter sigh. 10 years ago, I was a senior forensic accountant for Sterling and Finch in Denver. I specialized in corporate fraud and asset recovery. I was the person companies called when the numbers did not add up. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I was good, too good. I was hired to audit a shell company that was supposedly importing textiles. It was actually laundering money for a cartel that had deep ties to several real estate developers in Aspen. One of those developers was a partner of your grandfather. I stared at her. My grandfather? He was a philanthropist. He was a shark in a suit, Martha corrected, her voice flat. I found the trail. I had the documents. I was preparing to go to the district attorney. 2 days before my meeting. My car was run off the road on I-70. My laptop was stolen from the wreck. When I woke up in the hospital, I was under arrest for embezzlement. They planted evidence in my accounts. My firm fired me. My husband left me and took our daughter because he did not want to be associated with a criminal. I lost my license, my home, and my name. By the time the charges were dropped for lack of evidence, I was unhireable. I was broken. She gestured to the wall of papers. But I never stopped counting. I came here because this is where the money went. I have been watching them for 5 years. I watch the trash they throw out. I listen to their phone calls when they sit on park benches. I track their spending. You were watching my father, I said. It wasn't a question. Richard is not as smart as your grandfather, Martha said. He is sloppy. He is desperate. I saw the signs months ago. He has been liquidating assets quietly, selling off stocks, leveraging properties. He is bleeding cash. Lillian, the company is hollow. He has been running a Ponzi scheme to keep up appearances for Serena, and the walls are closing in. I looked at the photo of my father on the wall. He looked so confident, so untouchable. He is broke? Worse than broke. He is in debt to people who do not send collection letters. They send men with baseball bats, or men who tamper with gas lines. Martha looked me in the eye. But killing you is an extreme measure even for a desperate man. There is a variable I am missing. Why tonight? Why your 18th birthday? Why not a month ago? I set the mug down on the floor. My hands had stopped shaking, but a different kind of cold was settling in my stomach. It was the cold of realization. The Fairbanks Legacy Trust, I whispered. Martha's eyes narrowed. Explain. My mother, I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. I rarely spoke of her. She died when I was 2. She came from old money, oil money from Texas. When she married my father, her parents didn't trust him. They set up a trust fund for me. It was locked, completely untouchable, until the day I turned 18. Martha stood up and walked to the wall of papers, her mind clearly racing. How much? I do not know the exact number today, I said, but the last time the lawyers gave me an annual statement, when I was 16, it was valued at roughly $215 million. Martha let out a low whistle. She turned back to me. And the beneficiary clauses? What happens if you die? If I die without a will? I trailed off. I knew the answer. I had known it since I was a child. But it had always been an abstract legal concept, not a death sentence. If I die without a spouse or children, the trust reverts to my legal next of kin, my father. And since you just turned 18 today, you have not had time to draft a will. Martha finished for me. And you have not yet signed the papers to take control of the funds. I was supposed to go to the bank tomorrow morning, I said. That was the plan. Dad and I were going to go together. There is the timeline, Martha said, slamming her hand against the concrete wall. If you sign those papers tomorrow, the money is yours. Richard cannot touch it. But if you die tonight in a tragic accident during a blizzard, the money flows directly to him. $200 million, enough to pay off his debts, buy Serena a new yacht, and rebuild the company. The silence that filled the bunker was suffocating. I sat there and replayed the evening in my head, the specific vintage of wine he was drinking, a celebration, the way he wouldn't look at me, the suitcase packed by Serena. It wasn't just cruelty, it was a transaction. He had traded his daughter for a solvent balance sheet. He had weighed my life against his lifestyle. And I had come up light. I thought I would cry. I thought the grief would tear me apart. I waited for the tears to come, for the racking sobs that had threatened to consume me in the snow. But they didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sensation in the center of my chest. It felt like the water in the mug, still, flat, and cooling rapidly. The part of me that was a daughter, the part that craved his approval, the part that made excuses for him had burned up in the cabin. What was left was something hard, something calcified. He looked at me, I said softly. When I was leaving, he stood on the balcony and watched. He knew I was walking to my grave. He probably toasted it. Yes, Martha said. She was watching me closely, gauging my reaction. He did. And right now, he is probably calling the sheriff to report you missing, playing the part of the distraught father. By morning, the search parties will find the cabin. They will find the accident. They will mourn you, bury an empty coffin or some ashes, and deposit the check. She walked over and crouched in front of me. We were eye level, two women in a concrete hole, while the blizzard raged above us, burying the world we knew. You have a choice, Lillian, she said. Her voice was no longer the voice of a savior. It was the voice of a partner. You can take that bus ticket money you have, go to California, change your name, and live a quiet life as a waitress. You can survive. No one will ever know you are alive. You will be safe. I looked at her. Or, Martha said, a dangerous glint appearing in her eyes. We use what we have. You have the legal claim. You are the rightful owner of an empire. I have the skills. I know where the bodies are buried, metaphorically and now literally. I know how to follow the paper trail that Richard thinks he has hidden. He tried to kill me, I said. The words tasted like ash. He tried to erase you, Martha corrected, because you were an obstacle, but you are not an obstacle anymore. Lillian, you are a ghost. And ghosts are very difficult to fight because you cannot kill what is already dead. She reached into a box under the desk and pulled out a laptop. It was old, battered, and covered in duct tape, but when she opened it, the screen glowed with a complex array of code and financial software. I can get us into the system, she said. I can find the proof of the gas purchase. I can link the debts to the motive, but I cannot walk into that bank tomorrow. I cannot claim the trust. Only Lillian Fairbanks can do that. I looked at my hands. They were dirty, scratched, and trembling slightly. But they were mine. I thought of Serena's smirk. I thought of the warmth of the house they were sleeping in right now. Secure in the knowledge that I was freezing to death. They thought I was a loose end that had been tied off. They had no idea. I looked up at Martha. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity. It was the clarity of the blizzard. I do not want to go to California, I said. Martha smiled. It was a terrifying smile, full of teeth and years of suppressed rage. Good. I want them to lose everything, I said. I want my father to stand in the cold like I did. I want Serena to know what it feels like to have nothing. I want to take the money, the house, the reputation, all of it. We will not just take it, Martha said, extending her rough hand toward me. We will audit them. We will audit their lives until there is nothing left but the truth. I reached out and took her hand. Her grip was firm, calloused, and strong. It was an anchor. What do we do first? I asked. First, Martha said, turning to her laptop, we need to make sure that when you walk into that bank, you are not just a girl returning from the dead. We need to make sure you are a weapon. She started typing. The rhythmic clatter of the keys sounded like gunfire in the quiet bunker. We have 12 hours before the bank opens, she said, her face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. Tell me everything you know about your father's email passwords. Tell me about the accounts he thinks are secret. Tonight, We do not sleep. Tonight, we go to war. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. The cold was still there, lurking at the edges of the room, but I didn't feel it anymore. I felt something else burning inside me, hotter than the stove, hotter than the fire that had destroyed the cabin. I was ready to burn them down. The storm broke at dawn. When we pushed open the heavy steel hatch of the maintenance bunker, the world was blindingly bright. The sky was a hard, polished blue, innocent of the violence it had unleashed only hours before. Aspen was buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant, rhythmic beep of a snowplow reversing somewhere in the valley. I blinked against the glare, my eyes stinging. I felt brittle, like a piece of glass that had been superheated and then plunged into ice water. I was alive, but I did not feel like Lillian Fairbanks anymore. Lillian Fairbanks was a girl who worried about college applications and her father's approval. I was something else entirely. I was a weapon being forged by the woman standing next to me. "Hood up," Martha commanded. She had discarded her erratic street persona completely. She moved with the economy of a soldier. "Keep your head down. Walk with a limp if you have to. We are invisible." We did not go to the police station. That would have been the logical first step for a normal victim, but logic in Aspen was dictated by checkbooks. Sheriff Miller was a fixture at my father's Sunday golf games. I had seen him accept cases of vintage scotch from Richard's trunk. If I walked into his office, I would not be filed as a victim. I would be returned to my father as a confused runaway within the hour. Instead, we walked to the Pitkin County Library. It was a modern building of glass and stone, a public space where the billionaires and the drifters intersected, usually without ever making eye contact. We blended in perfectly with the morning crowd of people seeking warmth. We found 2 terminals in the back corner. Away from the circulation desk, Martha sat down and cracked her knuckles. First, we see the narrative they are building. Then, we dismantle it. I logged onto a guest session and navigated to Instagram. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I was afraid of what I would find. I took a breath and typed in Serena's handle. The post was at the top of her feed. Uploaded 4 hours ago, it was a photo of me, but it was not a flattering portrait. It was a picture taken 2 years ago when I had a severe case of influenza. My skin was pale and clammy, my eyes sunken with fever, my hair matted. But Serena had applied a filter that deepened the shadows under my eyes and washed out the color even further. I looked like a corpse, or a junkie. The caption read, "Our hearts are breaking. Our beloved Lillian has left home after a long battle with mental health and substance dependency. We tried to help her, but she refused our love. Please, if you see her, do not approach her as she may be unstable. Call the sheriff immediately. We just want our baby home safe. Pray for Lillian addiction awareness." I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. She is destroying my reputation. She is making sure that if anyone sees me looking disheveled, they will think I am high, not a victim of attempted murder. "Smart," Martha said, leaning over to look at the screen. Her face was impassive. "She is inoculating the public against the truth. If you scream, 'They tried to kill me,' it sounds like paranoid psychosis caused by withdrawal. Look at the comments." I scrolled down. Hundreds of comments. So sad. Rich kids always spiral. Sending prayers to you and Richard. You are saints for dealing with this. "Check your brother," Martha said. I switched tabs to Preston's profile. He was live. The red live icon pulsed in the corner of the screen. I clicked it. Preston was sitting in the driver's seat of his G-Wagon. He was wearing a furrowed brow that looked rehearsed in a mirror. "Guys, it is bad out here," Preston was saying to the camera, his voice dropping an octave to sound serious. "I have been driving around all morning looking for her. It is just crazy how drugs can change a person. I told her, 'Lil, we love you. Put down the pills.' But she just snapped. If you are watching this, Lil, come home. Dad is a wreck." I slammed my hand on the desk, causing the librarian 2 rows over to look up sharply. "He is lying. He bought the gas valve. He was there." Control yourself, Martha hissed. Anger is fuel, but do not let it flood the engine. This is good. They are committed to the runaway narrative. That means they are not looking for a body in the cabin debris yet. They think the explosion scared you off. Or maybe they think you never made it to the cabin and just kept walking. They need you to be missing, not dead, at least for the public. Why? Because a missing drug addict who freezes to death in a ravine 3 days later is a tragedy. Martha explained. A girl who explodes on her birthday is a crime scene. They are buying time. She minimized the windows. Now, we give them what they want. We give them a ghost to chase. Martha pulled a small flash drive from her pocket and plugged it into the library computer. She opened a program I didn't recognize. I have a clone of a SIM card from a tourist whose phone I found in a trash can last week. We are going to ping a location. She typed rapidly. I am sending a signal that mimics your phone's unique identifier. I am bouncing it off a cell tower in Grand Junction, 2 hours west of here. Then, 10 minutes later, I will ping it near the Greyhound bus station. They will think I got on a bus, I realized. Exactly, Martha said. They will send their private investigators to Grand Junction. They will check security cameras, bribe ticket agents, and scour the motels. While they are looking west, we will be right here, under their noses. She hit the enter key with a flourish. The rabbit is running. Now, let us look at the wolf. My father's email, I said. Do you know the password? He is a creature of habit, I said. He thinks he is a genius, so he assumes no one can guess his thoughts. But he is lazy. He has used the same password structure since AOL. I navigated to the login page for his private server. It was a secure corporate portal, not a standard Gmail account. Username is R_Fairbanks, I said. Password. I closed my eyes, thinking, he changes it every year, but the core is always the same. It is the name of the first company he bankrupted, followed by the year he thinks he will become a billionaire. Iron Cross 2030. I typed it in. Access denied. I frowned. He must have updated it. Think, Martha said. What is his obsession right now? What is the thing consuming his mind? Me, I said. Getting rid of me. Getting the money. Try the trust, Martha suggested. What is the name of the trust? Fairbanks Legacy, I said. I typed in Fairbanks Legacy 2026. Access denied. Try his ego, I said, a sudden memory surfacing. He always told me that he was the king of the mountain. He has a paperweight on his desk that says Apex Predator. I typed in Apex Predator 1. The screen flashed white, loading inbox. Got him, I whispered. Martha slid her chair closer, her shoulder pressing against mine. Search for Sterling. That is the family lawyer, correct? I typed the name into the search bar. Dozens of emails appeared. I clicked on the most recent one. Sent yesterday afternoon, just hours before he kicked me out. Subject. Contingency Plan B from Arthur Sterling, Richard Fairbanks. Richard, regarding the hypothetical scenario we discussed, if the beneficiary is permanently absent, meaning a confirmed fatality or a disappearance lasting longer than 7 years, the trust enters a probate stasis. However, there is a clause in your father's original drafting. Clause 4B, Emergency Stewardship. If the beneficiary is incapacitated or missing during a period of financial volatility for the holding company, the guardian may petition for emergency access to 20% of the principal to protect the legacy. But Richard, this requires a police report and a sworn affidavit that you have no knowledge of her whereabouts. If she walks through that door tomorrow, this entire strategy collapses. Are you certain she will not challenge the transfer? I read the email twice. Then I read my father's reply, sent from his phone 1 hour later. From Richard Fairbanks to Arthur Sterling. She will not challenge anything. She is gone. The weather will handle the details. Prepare the stewardship papers for signature at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I want that liquidity released by noon. He admitted it, I said, my voice shaking. He didn't write, "I killed her," but he wrote, "The weather will handle the details." That is premeditated murder. It is circumstantial, Martha corrected, her eyes scanning the text like a hawk. A good defense attorney would argue he meant he hoped the weather would deter you from coming back, or that you ran away because of the weather. It is not enough to convict him yet, but it is enough to know his schedule. She pointed to the time. 9 in the morning. That is when they are signing the papers to steal the first 20%. $40 million. We have to stop them, I said. No, Martha said, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. We do not stop them. We interrupt them. We need to get you into that room before the pen touches the paper. They will not let me in, I said. The bank security works for them. If I show up looking like this, I gestured to my clothes, which were still damp and smelled of smoke. They will drag me out. They will let you in if they think you are expected, Martha said. And if you look like the heiress you are. She opened a new tab and searched for the National Trust Bank's general line. You need to call them, but you are not Lillian. Who manages Richard's schedule? Who is the woman who organizes his life? Mrs. Gable, I said. She has been his executive assistant for 20 years. She is terrifying. She has a British accent and sounds like she is constantly judging you. Can you do the voice? Martha asked. I hesitated. I had spent my childhood mimicking Mrs. Gable to make my friends laugh. I think so. Do it, Martha commanded. Call the bank. Ask for the vice president of private wealth. Tell him there has been a change in plans. Richard is still coming, but the beneficiary is coming separately, and she needs a private intake meeting 10 minutes before the main signing. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes and pictured Mrs. Gable's tight bun and her pinched expression. I dialed the number on my own phone, which we had kept off until now to avoid tracking. I would only have this one chance before we had to pull the battery again. National Trust Bank, how may I direct your call? A smooth voice answered. This is Beatrice Gable calling from the office of Richard Fairbanks, I said, my voice dropping a register, clipping the consonants with icy precision. Connect me to Mr. Harrison immediately. It is regarding the Fairbanks Trust. One moment. Mrs. Gable. The hold music played. I looked at Martha. She gave me a thumbs up. Mrs. Gable? Mr. Harrison's voice boomed. He sounded nervous. Everyone was nervous around Mrs. Gable. We are all ready for Richard at 9. There has been a slight adjustment to the protocol. Mr. Harrison, I said, injecting a tone of weary annoyance, as if Richard was being difficult. Mr. Fairbanks will be arriving with his legal counsel as planned. However, Miss Lillian Fairbanks has requested a separate entrance. She wishes to review the audit logs privately before the joint session. Oh, Harrison paused. I was under the impression, well, based on the news. The news is hysteria. Mr. Harrison, I snapped. Teenage drama. Lillian is fine, merely sulking. She wants to ensure her assets are secure before she faces her father. You know how volatile family disputes can be. We want to avoid a scene in the lobby, don't we? Of course, Harrison stammered. Avoiding a scene is our priority. Excellent. She will be there at 8:45. She has lost her ID in this chaos, but she will have her passport number. Do not make her wait, or her father will be displeased. And Mr. Harrison? Do not mention this separate meeting to Richard. He wants to surprise her with an apology, and if he knows she's already there auditing the books, it will ruin the mood. It was a bold lie, but it played into the banker's desire to keep everyone happy. Understood. Mrs. Gable, 8:45. We will escort her to the Red Room. Good day. I hung up and immediately pulled the battery from my phone. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. You are a natural, Martha said. And for the first time, there was genuine respect in her voice. We have an appointment, I said. But we have a problem. I look like a homeless person. If I walk into the National Trust Bank like this, they will call security before I can say a word. Martha stood up and grabbed her backpack. Then we need to go shopping. And I know exactly where to go. We are not going to Chanel. Lillian, we are going to the thrift store on the edge of town. The rich women of Aspen donate their clothes there after wearing them once. We will find you armor. She looked at the clock on the library wall. We have 14 hours, she said. We need to sleep. We need to eat. And we need to prepare the documents. Tonight, we do not just survive. Tonight, we sharpen the knife. I looked at the screen one last time, at the fake smile on my father's face in an old press photo. I am ready, I said, and I meant it. The blizzard had taken everything from me, but it had left me with the one thing my father never expected: nothing to lose. The fluorescent lights of the Salvation Army thrift store on the edge of town hummed with a low, electric buzz. It was 6 a.m, and the store had not technically opened yet. But Martha knew the owner, a man named Saul, who owed her a favor for catching a tax error in his filings 3 years ago. I stood in front of a cracked full-length mirror, staring at a stranger. The girl in the mirror was wearing a charcoal gray pantsuit that was perhaps 10 years out of fashion. It was a Saint, John Knit's original, something that had once cost $2,000, but had ended up here for $12.50. It smelled faintly of lavender and old cedar, but it fit. It was armor. Martha stood behind me, her hands working quickly. She had found a half-used bottle of high-end foundation in the cosmetics bin and was using it to cover the purple bruises blooming on my cheekbones and the raw, red patches of windburn on my nose. She applied the makeup not with the gentleness of a mother, but with the precision of a mortician preparing a body for an open casket. "Hold still," she commanded. "You look like a victim. We need you to look like a shareholder." "I am shaking," I whispered. My hands were trembling at my sides, a physical reaction to the adrenaline dumping into my system. "Let them shake," Martha said, stepping back to survey her work. "It is cold outside, but when you walk into that room, you turn it into ice. You do not smile. You do not cry. You are the daughter of Jeffrey Fairbanks, the man who built this town. You are not Richard's little girl anymore." She handed me a pair of oversized sunglasses she had found on a rack near the register. They were scratched, but they would hide the fear in my eyes until I was ready to show them the fire. Martha had transformed herself too. She had washed her hair in the sink of the gas station down the street. She had pulled it back into a severe, tight bun. She wore a black trench coat over a white blouse that we had steamed with the hand dryer in the restroom. She carried an old leather briefcase that she had dug out of her stash in the bunker. It was scuffed, but it looked heavy with importance. She no longer looked like the crazy woman who screamed at pigeons. She looked like a shark that had been swimming in deep, dark waters, waiting to surface. "It is time," she said. We walked to the bank. The morning sun was brilliant, bouncing off the fresh snow and blinding anyone foolish enough to look directly at it. The town was waking up. Delivery trucks were idling, their exhaust pluming into the crisp air. I saw people I knew, shopkeepers, baristas, neighbors, but they did not see me. They saw 2 women in business attire walking with purpose. They assumed we belonged. The National Trust Bank was a fortress of marble and brass on the corner of Galena Street. It was the institution that held the secrets of every wealthy family in Aspen. We entered the revolving doors at exactly 8:45. The lobby was quiet, smelling of money, a specific scent of polished floors, conditioned air, and freshly printed currency. A security guard looked up, his eyes scanning us. I lifted my chin, channeling every ounce of entitlement I had watched Serena display over the years. I walked past him as if he were furniture. I approached the receptionist's desk. "Lillian Fairbanks," I said. My voice was steady. "I have an appointment with Mr. Harrison." The receptionist blinked. Her eyes widened slightly as she recognized the name, then flickered with confusion as she looked at my face, partially obscured by the sunglasses. She glanced down at her schedule, then back at me. "Ms. Fairbanks?" she stammered. "But Mr. Fairbanks is already here. He is in the red room with the family. We were under the impression that I was detained," I finished for her. "My father is prone to exaggeration. Is Mr. Harrison inside?" He is preparing the documents, she said, her hand hovering over the phone. Should I call him? No, Martha interjected, stepping forward. She placed a hand on the marble counter, leaning in. We are on a tight schedule. We will proceed directly to the conference room. Do not announce us. Mr. Fairbanks prefers his meetings uninterrupted. The authority in Martha's tone was absolute. The receptionist nodded, intimidated, and gestured toward the heavy double doors at the end of the hall. We walked down the corridor. The carpet swallowed the sound of our heels. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a sledgehammer, but my mind was curiously silent. I was about to destroy my family. I was about to burn down the house my father lived in, metaphorically speaking, just as he had burned down my sanctuary. I reached the doors. I could hear voices inside. It is a tragedy, truly, a voice was saying. It was Arthur Sterling, the family lawyer. But life must go on, and the assets require management. The weather reports indicate the search could take weeks. We cannot leave the portfolio frozen for that long. Just give me the pen. Arthur? My father's voice cut in. He sounded impatient, not sad, impatient. I need to authorize the transfer to the holding company by noon to cover the margin call. Richard. Darling, your hand is shaking, Serena cooed. Here, drink some water. It has been such a stressful night. Stressful, Preston grunted. I had to freeze my ass off doing that live stream. Shut up. Preston, my father snapped. I looked at Martha. She nodded. I pushed the doors open. They swung wide with a heavy, expensive whoosh. The air in the room changed instantly. There were 5 people sitting around the massive mahogany table. My father sat at the head, a gold fountain pen hovering over a stack of documents. Serena was to his right, wearing black, mourning clothes she must have had packed and ready. Preston was slumped in a chair, scrolling on his phone. Arthur Sterling stood by the window. Mr. Harrison, the bank president, was standing next to my father, pointing at a signature line. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb being cracked open. I took a step inside. Martha followed, closing the doors behind us with a definitive click. I took off my sunglasses. My father dropped the pen. It hit the table, rolling across the polished wood and leaving a small splatter of black ink, like a dark tear. His face went gray. All the blood drained from it instantly, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat. Lillian? He whispered. It was not a greeting. It was a question asked by a man who does not believe in ghosts, but is looking at one. Serena let out a strangled sound, half gasp, half scream. She pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes bulging. But the storm, the cabin. The cabin had a gas leak. Serena, I said. My voice was cool, clear, and carried across the room without effort. Someone tampered with the flue. Someone bypassed the regulator. It exploded about 2 hours after I left the house. If I had been inside, I would be ash right now. I walked closer to the table. I saw Preston shrink back in his seat, his eyes darting to the door as if looking for an escape route. But I was not inside, I continued, stopping directly across from my father. I placed my hands on the table and leaned in. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. Even at 9 in the morning. I met a friend. She warned me, I gestured to Martha. Mr. Harrison looked from me to my father, and then to the documents on the table. He was a good man, a man who had respected my grandfather. He saw the shock on Richard's face, not the shock of relief, but the shock of a failed execution. He saw the terror in Serena's eyes. Lillian, Mr. Harrison said, stepping away from my father as if Richard were contagious. My God, we were told your father said you had run away. He said you were missing and presumed in danger. I was in danger, Mr. Harrison, I said, keeping my eyes locked on my father. I was in danger of being murdered for an inheritance. That is a lie, Serena shrieked, standing up. She is hysterical. Look at her. She looks like a beggar. She is on drugs. Richard, tell them she is having a psychotic break. Sit down. Mrs. Fairbanks, Martha said. Her voice was a whip crack. Serena froze. She looked at Martha, really looked at her, and sneered. Who is this? A vagrant you picked up off the street? Security? Get these people out of here. My name is Martha Galloway, Martha said, stepping forward and placing her briefcase on the table. She opened it and pulled out a single, crisp file folder. I am acting as temporary legal counsel and financial auditor for Ms. Lillian Fairbanks, and you are not calling security, because if you do, I will hand this file to the FBI agents who are currently having coffee across the street. Martha Galloway? Arthur Sterling squinted, his face paling. The forensic accountant? I thought you were disbarred. I am currently a private consultant, Martha said smoothly. And I have been consulting on the Fairbanks finances all night. I have some interesting findings regarding the liquidity of the family company, Richard, and some very curious purchases made on a credit card linked to your stepson yesterday afternoon. Industrial gas fittings? A bladder bag for a chimney? Preston made a noise like a wounded animal. I didn't. Mom told me to. Shut up, Preston! Serena and Richard screamed in unison, but the damage was done. The air in the room was thick with guilt. I looked at Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I am Lillian Fairbanks. I am 18 years old as of yesterday. I am alive. I am of sound mind, and I am standing in front of you. I pointed to the stack of papers under my father's hand. What is that? Mr. Harrison reached out and snatched the papers away from my father. Richard tried to grab them, but his reflexes were slow, dulled by shock and wine. These are stewardship documents. Mr. Harrison said, his voice hardening. Granting your father emergency access to the trust principal due to your absence. I am not absent, I said. So those documents are invalid. Completely. Mr. Harrison said. He ripped the top page in half. The sound of tearing paper was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. Mr. Harrison, I said, I would like to exercise my right as the sole beneficiary of the Fairbanks Legacy Trust. I am taking control of my assets, effective immediately. You can't. Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. You ungrateful little brat. After everything I gave you, you are a child. You don't know how to manage money. I know enough not to steal it, I shot back. Richard, sit down. Mr. Harrison barked. He turned to me, his demeanor shifting completely. He was no longer the family banker. He was the guardian of the vault. And he had just realized the fox was in the henhouse. Lillian, are you requesting a full transfer? Yes, I said. But first, I want an audit. Martha stepped forward again. Mr. Harrison, on behalf of my client, we are formally requesting an immediate freeze on all accounts associated with Richard Fairbanks, Serena Fairbanks, and the Fairbanks Development Group. We have reason to believe that funds from the trust have been anticipated and leveraged against illegal debts. We also have reason to suspect fraudulent conveyance. You have no proof, Arthur Sterling sputtered. Though he was already packing his briefcase, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but in this room. We have the emails, I said calmly. We have the email you sent yesterday. Arthur, the one about Plan B, the one where you discussed how to access the money if I was permanently absent. Arthur stopped moving. He looked at my father with pure hatred. You said you deleted the server logs. Richard, Richard stammered. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Lily, please, it is not what it looks like. I was in trouble. I just needed a loan. I was going to pay it back. I would never hurt you. I love you. I looked at the man who had raised me. I looked at the man who had stood on a balcony and watched me walk into a blizzard. I saw the sweat beading on his forehead. I saw the terror of a man who knows his life is over. You love yourself, Dad, I said, and you love your lifestyle. You don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have given me a suitcase and a death sentence for my birthday. I turned to Mr. Harrison. Freeze it all, every penny. I want them to walk out of here with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Consider it done. Mr. Harrison said. He picked up the conference phone and dialed a 4-digit extension. Security? Yes. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Fairbanks and Mr. Sterling to the exit, and notify the fraud department to place a lock on all related accounts. Authorization code Harrison Alpha 1. No! Serena lunged across the table, her fingernails aiming for my face. You little witch! You ruin everything! Martha didn't even flinch. She simply stepped in front of me and shoved Serena backward. Serena stumbled in her high heels and fell onto the plush carpet, a mess of black fabric and rage. The doors opened again, and 2 uniformed security guards stepped in. Please escort them out, Mr. Harrison said, not even looking at them. Richard looked at me one last time as the guards took his arms. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked old. He looked broken. Lillian, where will we go? We have no cash. The cards will be declined. I picked up the fountain pen he had dropped. I held it up, inspecting the gold nib. I hear the shelter in downtown Denver is nice this time of year, I said. Or maybe you can find a cabin in the woods. Just check the gas line before you go to sleep. I watched them being dragged out. Serena was screaming obscenities. Preston was crying. Richard was silent. When the doors closed, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a battlefield after the victory has been won. I looked at Martha. She adjusted her glasses and gave me a rare, small smile. That, she said, was a very good start. Mr. Harrison, I said, turning to the banker who was looking at me with a mixture of awe and pity. I need to open a new account, and I need to hire a forensic accountant. I believe Ms. Galloway is available. I believe she is. Mr. Harrison said, extending his hand to Martha. Welcome to National Trust. Ms. Galloway, let's get to work. The revolving doors of the National Trust Bank had barely ceased spinning behind my father's defeated back before the war shifted fronts. In the physical world, Richard and Serena Fairbanks walked to their Range Rover in a tight, silent formation, preserving the illusion of dignity that old money clings to like a life raft. But in the digital ether, the screaming had already begun. Serena did not waste a second. By the time Martha and I were escorted into a private office to sign the transfer documents, my stepmother had already launched a nuclear strike on social media. She was not a woman who fought with fists. She fought with narratives. And she knew that in the court of public opinion, the first person to cry is usually the one who gets the sympathy. Martha opened her laptop on the mahogany desk of the bank's VIP suite. She is fast, Martha muttered, tapping a key. Look at this. Serena had posted a video. She was sitting in the front seat of the car, the lighting perfectly adjusted to catch the single, brave tear tracking down her cheek. The caption read, "The nightmare continues." Friends, Serena whispered into the camera, her voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility. We just found Lillian, but oh God, it is worse than we thought. She is not herself. She has fallen under the influence of a dangerous individual. A woman known to the local police as a mentally unstable transient. This woman, this predator has brainwashed our daughter. She has convinced Lillian that we are the enemy. She dragged Lillian into a bank to try and extort money from us while Lillian stood there, looking like a zombie. We are terrified for her safety. Please, if you see Martha Galloway, call the police immediately. She has kidnapped our child's mind. It was a masterclass in manipulation. In 60 seconds, she had turned my emancipation into an abduction. She had taken Martha, my savior, and painted her as a cult leader preying on a drug-addled heiress. The comments are already flooding in, Martha said, scrolling down. People are calling for a manhunt. They are saying I am a witch. They are tagging the FBI. It gets worse, I said, looking at my own phone, which I had finally turned back on. Sheriff Miller just issued a bolo. Be on the lookout for you. The charge is custodial interference and suspected fraud targeting a vulnerable adult. He is playing their game. I felt a flash of the old fear, the instinct to hide, to let my father control the story, because he always controlled the story. But then I looked at the new bank balance on the screen in front of me. $215 million. I was not a vulnerable adult. I was a fully funded army. "We need a lawyer," I said. "Not a family friend, not someone who plays golf with Richard. We need a killer." Martha smiled. "I know a firm in Denver. They defended the whistleblowers in the farm tech scandal. They hate the Aspen elite. They eat guys like Arthur Sterling for breakfast." "Call them," I said. "Tell them I will pay double their hourly rate if they can get a team here in 2 hours. And tell them to bring a camera crew." We did not hide. Hiding would only confirm Serena's narrative that I was being held against my will. Instead, we walked out of the bank and straight into the most expensive law office suite in town, which we rented on the spot with a single swipe of my new platinum debit card. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena Vance, arrived by helicopter. She listened to our story for 10 minutes, her expression shifting from skepticism to cold fury. "This is not a legal battle anymore, Lillian," Elena said, pacing the office that overlooked the ski slopes. "This is a PR war. If the police arrest Martha, they will separate you. They will put you in a psychiatric hold for 72 hours for your own safety, and in those 3 days, your father will have time to destroy the evidence at the cabin and reshape the narrative. We cannot let them arrest her." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We go live," Elena said. "Serena wants a show? Let's give her a reality check." We set up the shot in front of the window. No filters, no sad music. Just me, sitting in a chair, wearing the thrift store suit, with Martha sitting calmly beside me, not behind me, not looming over me, but beside me as an equal. I pressed the Go Live button on my newly recovered Instagram account. Within seconds, the viewer count jumped from 0 to 5,000, then 10,000. The entire town, perhaps the entire state, had been waiting for the drug addict heiress to surface. "My name is Lillian Fairbanks," I began. I looked directly into the lens. I did not cry. I made sure my voice was as cold as the wind that had almost killed me. "I am not on drugs. I am not brainwashed. And I am not missing." I took a breath. Yesterday was my 18th birthday. My stepmother, Serena, went on the internet this morning and told you she is worried about me. She told you she wants me home, but she forgot to mention the birthday present she gave me. I reached down and held up the printout of the gate logs we had pulled from the security system server, one of the many things Martha had hacked while we were waiting for the lawyers. "This is the access log for the Fairbanks estate," I said, holding the paper steady. At 8:04 in the evening, the front gate was opened. At 8:05, it was closed, and at 8:06, my personal access code was deleted from the system. Who locks their beloved daughter out in a blizzard if they want her safe? The viewer count hit 50,000. The chat was moving so fast, it was a blur of emojis and shocked questions. "She says I ran away," I continued. "But I didn't run. I was pushed. I was given a suitcase full of rags and told to learn grit. I walked to the family hunting cabin. It was the only shelter I had." I paused. This was the moment. The turn. "Serena says this woman, Martha, is a villain. She says Martha kidnapped me. The truth is, Martha tackled me into a snowbank 3 seconds before that cabin exploded." I leaned closer to the camera. "My father, Richard Fairbanks, knew I was going to that cabin, and 2 hours before I arrived, someone bypassed the safety regulator on the propane tank and sealed the chimney flue. It wasn't a shelter. It was a gas chamber rigged to blow." The internet exploded. Comments started flooding in. "Justice for Lillian. Fairbanks fraud. Did he just kill his daughter?" "Sheriff Miller is currently looking for Martha," I said, pointing to my friend. "He wants to arrest the only person who saved my life. Why? Because Sheriff Miller plays golf with my father every Sunday, because my father is broke, and if I died last night, he would have inherited $200 million this morning. Do the math." I ended the stream. The silence in the room lasted for 3 seconds, and then Elena's phone started ringing. Then the office landline. Then Martha's burner phone. "You just broke the internet," Elena said, checking Twitter. You are trending #1 worldwide, higher than the Super Bowl halftime show announcements. But the real victory wasn't on the screen. It was on the ground. The court of public opinion is a fickle beast, but when it scents blood, it moves faster than any police force. Within 30 minutes of my broadcast, the first independent journalists and true crime streamers were arriving at the trailhead leading to the cabin. They didn't wait for the police. They had drones. They had shovels. They had a hunger for the truth that Sheriff Miller couldn't suppress. We watched it unfold on the news in the lawyer's office. A helicopter from a Denver news station was circling the site. The footage was grainy, but undeniable. The cabin was a blackened ruin against the pristine white snow, but the drone zoomed in on the side of the structure, where the external propane tank stood. Even through the devastation, the yellow brass of the wrench marks on the valve was visible against the gray steel. And there, lying in the snow where the roof had blown off, was the shredded remains of a heavy-duty rubber bladder, the kind used to seal pipes, or in this case, a chimney. A reporter on the ground, a young woman wrapped in a parka, was shouting over the wind into her microphone. "We are here at the Fairbanks property, and what we are seeing contradicts the official police statement entirely. The sheriff said this was a heating malfunction due to lack of maintenance, but we have found what appears to be industrial-grade tampering equipment scattered in the debris radius. The internet sleuths were right." Back in town, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Sheriff Miller had been preparing a press conference to denounce me as unstable. We watched him walk up to the podium, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cold. A journalist from the New York Times, who had just flown in, shouted a question before Miller could even speak. "Sheriff, is it true you received a campaign donation from Richard Fairbanks 3 days ago? And why haven't you secured the crime scene at the cabin?" Miller froze. He looked at the cameras, then at his deputy. He realized the shield of the Old Boys Club had just been shattered by a 1,000,000-strong mob of angry citizens. "We are, reopening the investigation," Miller stammered. "In light of new evidence presented by the victim." "Victim?" another reporter shouted. "5 hours ago you called her a suspect." "We are calling in the State Bureau of Investigation," Miller said, wiping his face. "This is now an active, multi-agency crime scene. No further questions." He ran off the stage. In our office, Martha let out a long, low breath. He folded. "The State Bureau is honest. Or at least, they are too big for Richard to bribe." I looked out the window at the town of Aspen. It looked the same as it always had. Quaint, expensive, beautiful. But the rot beneath the surface had been exposed. I could imagine my father sitting in his study, watching the same news feed, watching the walls close in. He had relied on silence. He had relied on the polite discretion of the wealthy. He had forgotten that I was part of a generation that weaponized noise. "What now?" I asked Elena. "Now," the lawyer said, picking up a stack of files. "We stop playing defense. The police will handle the criminal charges, but we are going to handle the money. I have a judge on the line who just saw your live stream. He is granting a temporary restraining order against your father and stepmother, and he is appointing an independent auditor for the family company." She looked at Martha. "That would be you, Ms. Galloway, officially?" Martha stood up and smoothed her skirt. "I have the spreadsheets ready. I know exactly where to look. They have an offshore account in the Caymans that they use to pay for consultants. I bet we will find a payment to a man with a blue parka in that ledger." "Go," I said to Martha. "Find it." "And you?" Martha asked, pausing at the door. "What will you do?" I turned back to the window. I saw a black SUV speeding away from my father's estate, followed by 3 news vans. The hunt was on. "I am going to buy a new coat," I said, my voice flat. "And then I am going to watch them run." The media war was over. I had won, but the satisfaction I felt wasn't warm. It was cold, like the ice in my veins. I had stripped them naked before the world, just as they had stripped me of my home. It was poetic. It was just, and it was only the beginning. The courtroom of public opinion had delivered its verdict. But Martha Galloway was not interested in likes or retweets. She was interested in the kind of ink that did not wash off: bank records, IP addresses, and timestamps. While the media camped outside the lawyer's office, turning the sidewalk into a circus of cameras and microphones, we retreated into the windowless conference room to perform the autopsy on my father's empire. It was a sterile process. There was no shouting, no dramatic music, just the rhythmic clicking of Martha's keyboard and the hum of the high-speed printer. We were dissecting the Fairbanks Development Group, the company my grandfather had built with grit and steel, and which my father was currently dismantling with greed and incompetence. "Here is the bleed," Martha said, pointing to a spreadsheet projected onto the wall. Her voice was devoid of emotion, the voice of a surgeon pointing out a tumor. "Your father is the CEO, but he does not own the majority controlling interest. The board of directors does, and the board requires an annual solvency report. That meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday." I looked at the numbers. They were a sea of red ink disguised by clever accounting tricks. "He has been embezzling," Martha explained, tracing the line items with a laser pointer. "Look at these transfers. $2 million in January to Consulting Omega, $3 million in February to Apex Solutions. These are not real vendors. Lillian, they are shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. I traced the ownership. They all lead back to a single holding entity controlled by Richard Fairbanks." "So he stole the money," I said. "Why? To buy cars? To pay for Serena's jewelry?" "No," Martha said, shaking her head. "That would be simple greed. This is desperation. Richard is a gambler. Lillian, a terrible one. He took that $5 million and poured it into speculative cryptocurrency futures and high-risk biotech startups that did not exist. He thought he could double the company's capital without the board knowing, take the profit for himself, and return the principal before the audit. But he lost it, I realized. He lost it all, Martha confirmed. He is currently $85 million in the hole if the board sees these books next Tuesday. He goes to federal prison for corporate fraud. He needed a miracle to plug that gap. He needed a massive injection of liquid cash that he could explain away as a family investment or a merger. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The timing, the urgency, the specific date of my birthday. "My trust fund," I whispered. $215 million. "Exactly," Martha said. It was not just about getting rid of a daughter he found annoying. It was a mathematical necessity. If you died, the money reverted to him. He could take $85 million to fill the hole in the company accounts, keep the rest for himself, and play the grieving father while the board applauded his financial stewardship. You were not a person to him. Lillian, you were a balance transfer. I stared at the projection, my life, my death, reduced to a row of pixels on an Excel sheet. It was so cold, so logical, and so utterly evil that it bypassed anger and went straight to nausea. "We have the motive," Martha said, closing the spreadsheet. "Now, let us find the weapon." She opened a new file. This one contained the credit card statements for the Fairbanks household. We had obtained them through a discovery motion Elena filed an hour ago, but Martha had likely found them through less official channels before the ink on the motion was dry. "Criminals are often stupid," Martha said. "But arrogant criminals are the worst. They believe they are untouchable, so they do not bother to hide their tracks. Look at the supplementary card ending in 4, 5, 9, 8. That is Serena's card," I said. "But she lets Preston use it for emergencies. Apparently, purchasing industrial sabotage equipment counts as an emergency," Martha noted dryly. She highlighted 3 transactions from 4 days ago. February 1st, Amazon Industrial Supply. High-pressure propane regulator bypass valve. $250, expedited shipping, February 1st. Tech Spy Warehouse. Portable GSM/LTE. Signal jammer, $400, February 2nd. Home Depot online. Heavy-duty chimney flue bladder, $80. He bought them online, I said, stunned by the idiocy. He used a credit card linked to his mother's name to buy the exact items used to rig the cabin. He likely thought that if the cabin exploded, the evidence would be destroyed, Martha said. Or he thought that since the police chief is a family friend, no one would ever subpoena these records. He did not count on an independent audit. The signal jammer, I said, remembering the silence of my phone as I stood outside the gate. That is why I had no service. It wasn't the storm. It was Preston sitting in his room with a toy he bought with Mommy's money. It establishes premeditation, Martha said. And conspiracy. Serena paid for it. Preston bought it. Richard ordered it. It is a family affair. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the polished wood. The screen lit up with a notification from an unknown number. I picked it up. It was a text message. Drop the lawsuit or you will regret it. Accidents happen every day. Watch your back. I showed the screen to Martha. They are scared. They are terrified, Martha corrected. This is the extinction burst, the flailing of a dying animal. Should I block it? I asked. No, Martha said. We archive it. Then, you publish it. Transparency is your shield. If something happens to you now, the whole world knows who threatened you. I took a screenshot. I opened my social media app. I posted the image with a simple caption. This is what they send when they know you have the truth. I am not afraid. Within seconds, the post had 10,000 shares. The internet detectives were already tracing the area code. It was a burner phone, surely. But the geolocation metadata would likely point straight back to the Fairbanks estate. We have the financial motive, Martha summarized, ticking off points on her fingers. We have the purchase history of the murder weapon. We have the threats. But we need one more thing. We need to place them at the scene. We need to prove it wasn't just Preston acting alone. We need to nail Serena. Nobody saw them, I said. It was a blizzard. The roads were empty. The roads are never empty, Martha said. She pulled a USB drive from her pocket. There is always someone watching. In this case, it was the municipal government. The snowplows, I guessed. Snowplow number 42, Martha said, plugging the drive into the laptop. I called the Department of Public Works. I told them I was reviewing insurance claims for a fender bender near your estate and needed to see the dashcam footage from the night of the storm. Bureaucrats are very helpful if you sound boring enough. She clicked on a video file. The grainy footage showed the view from the cab of a massive plow truck. Snow swirling in the headlights. The timestamp in the corner read February 3rd, 4:30 p.m., 4 hours before I was kicked out. The plow was moving slowly down the service road that ran parallel to our estate, the road that led to the back entrance of the hardware store in town. Watch the oncoming lane, Martha said. A black Range Rover approached, heading away from the hardware store and back toward our house. As it passed the plow, the headlights illuminated the interior for a split second. Martha paused the video. She zoomed in. The resolution was pixelated, but clear enough. Serena was behind the wheel. Her face was set in a grim line. In the passenger seat sat Preston. He was holding a large brown paper bag with the logo of the local hardware supply store, and sticking out of the bag was the distinct brass shape of a gas valve. Got her, Martha whispered. She drove the getaway car. She drove him to buy the parts. She is not an accessory after the fact. She is a co-conspirator. She looks so focused, I said, looking at the grainy image of the woman who had pretended to be my mother for 10 years. She doesn't look like a victim of Richard's manipulation. She looks like she's on a mission. She is protecting her investment, Martha said. She knew about the embezzlement. She knew about the trust fund. She was driving Preston to the hardware store to buy the tools to kill you, and then she probably went home and helped you pack your suitcase. I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. They are monsters. They are criminals, Martha corrected, closing the laptop. And we have just caught them. She stood up and began organizing the printed documents into 3 separate piles. She bound them with heavy clips. The stacks were thick, inches of paper that represented the total destruction of the Fairbanks name. "We are not sending this to Sheriff Miller," Martha said. "He would lose it, or bury it, or accidentally burn it." "Who gets it?" I asked. "The United States Attorney for the District of Colorado," Martha said, "and the FBI field office in Denver. We are alleging wire fraud, which is federal. We are alleging bank fraud, which is federal. And we are alleging conspiracy to commit murder involving an interstate trust fund." "When do we send it?" "We don't send it," Martha said, picking up the heavy files. "We have a courier waiting downstairs, an armored courier. It will be on the desk of the federal prosecutor in 2 hours." She handed me one of the files. "This copy is for the judge handling your civil protection order. Elena is in court right now. She needs this to get the asset freeze." I took the file. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. We walked out of the conference room. Elena Vance was waiting for us in the lobby. Her phone pressed to her ear. She looked up, saw the file in my hand, and nodded. "I have the judge in chambers," Elena said to me, covering the mouthpiece. "He has seen the news. He has seen the text message you posted. He is ready to sign." I handed her the file. "Here is the rest. The embezzlement, the credit card receipts for the gas valve, the dashcam footage of Serena." Elena's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "My God, you didn't just find a smoking gun. You found the receipt for the bullets." She uncovered the phone. "Your Honor, I am sending over an evidentiary supplement. You are going to want to sit down for this. Yes. We are requesting a total emergency freeze on all assets held by Richard Fairbanks, Serena Fairbanks, Preston Fairbanks, and the Fairbanks Development Group. Yes, immediately. Flight risk is extreme." Elena hung up and looked at us. "It is done. The order is being typed up now, within 30 minutes. Every bank account, every credit card, every stock portfolio linked to their social security numbers will be locked. They won't be able to buy a pack of gum." "What about their passports?" Martha asked. "Flagged," Elena said. "If they try to board a plane, TSA will detain them." I walked over to the window. I looked out at the mountains, the same mountains that had almost killed me. I imagined my father sitting in his study, pouring another glass of wine, thinking he could still talk his way out of this, thinking he could call the sheriff, thinking he could charm the board. He didn't know that the invisible money he worshipped had just been turned off. "They are going to run," I said. "When the cards stop working, when they realize the sheriff can't help them, they will panic." "Let them run," Martha said, standing beside me. "Rats always run when the lights come on, but the cage is already closed." I looked at the time. It was 3 in the afternoon, less than 24 hours since I had been kicked out. "I want to send them one thing," I said. "A message?" Martha asked. "No," I said. "A notification." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for the Fairbanks Legacy Trust. My trust. I set up a recurring automatic transfer of 1 cent to my father's frozen account. Attached to the transfer was a memo note for the gas bill. I hit send. "Now," I said, turning away from the window. "We wait for the explosion." But this time, I knew the fire wouldn't burn me. It would burn the people who lit the match. The Hotel Jerome was a fortress of brick and velvet, a place where the wealthy usually retreated to hide from the world. But tonight, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a bunker. We had rented the presidential suite on the top floor, not for the luxury, but for the security. The elevator required a key card. The stairwells were monitored, and the door was solid oak. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the snow. Inside, the air was thick with the tension of waiting. We knew they would come. When you back a wild animal into a corner, it does not surrender, it bites. We had cut off their money, their reputation, and their future in the span of 6 hours. The extinction burst, that was what Martha called it. The final, frantic explosion of energy before the end. It started with a phone call from the front desk at 7 in the evening. "Ms. Fairbanks," the concierge said, his voice hushed and uncomfortable. "Your father is here. He is causing a bit of a scene in the lobby. He says he needs to speak with you. He says it is a medical emergency." I looked at Martha. She was sitting by the fire, reading a thick legal brief. She didn't look up, but she nodded. "Send him up," I told the concierge. "But tell security to stand by the elevator." "Are you sure?" Martha asked, finally closing the file. "I need to hear it," I said. "I need to know if there is anything human left in him." When the elevator doors opened 5 minutes later, the man who stepped out was barely recognizable as Richard Fairbanks. My father was a man who defined himself by his grooming. His hair was always perfect, his suits tailored in London, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. The man in the hallway looked like he had aged 10 years in a day. His coat was unbuttoned, his tie was loose, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He smelled of stale scotch and fear. He saw me standing in the doorway of the suite, and his face crumbled. It was a performance. I knew that, but it was a terrifyingly good one. "Lily," he choked out, stumbling forward. "Oh, thank God. Thank God you are safe. I saw the news. I saw the video. I didn't know. Baby, I swear to you, I didn't know." He tried to hug me. I stepped back. The movement was small, but it hit him like a slap. He froze, his arms hovering in the empty air. "You didn't know?" I asked. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "You didn't know about the gas valve? You didn't know about the email to Arthur Sterling?" "Serena," he hissed, the name spitting from his lips like poison. He looked over his shoulder, as if she might be hiding in the elevator. "It was all her. She is sick, Lillian. She has been poisoning my mind for years. She handled the finances. She handled the house. I was just depressed. I was drinking too much. I signed things I didn't read. She told me the cabin was just a precaution, a way to scare you into coming back home." He fell to his knees. My father, the Titan of Aspen, was on his knees on the hotel carpet, weeping. "She manipulated me," he sobbed, reaching for the hem of my pants. "She told me you were out of control. She told me the trust fund was the only way to save the family legacy for you. I did it for you, Lillian. I wanted to save the company so you would have something to inherit. She twisted everything. Please, you have to stop the lawyers. You have to unfreeze the accounts. They are going to arrest me. You can't let them put your father in a cage." I looked down at him. I saw the tears. I heard the desperation. And for a split second, a treacherous part of my heart wavered. It was the little girl inside me, the one who had spent 16 years trying to be good enough, trying to make him smile, trying to fill the void my mother left. He was my dad. He looked so small. Maybe he was a victim. Maybe Serena really was the mastermind, and he was just a weak, foolish man who got caught in her web. I started to say. "Dad, He did not cry when you walked out the door," a voice said from behind me. It was Martha. She hadn't moved from the fireplace, but her voice cut through the air like a blade. Richard's head snapped up, his eyes narrowed, and for a fleeting instant, the mask slipped. I saw pure, unadulterated hatred in his gaze before he smoothed it back into sorrow. "You," he snarled at her. "You are the one doing this. You are poisoning my daughter." "I am just the accountant," Martha said, standing up and walking slowly toward us. "But I have a very good memory for variables. Lillian, remember the balcony. Remember the glass of wine in his hand. Remember the angle of his head." I closed my eyes. I went back to the moment the gate closed. I saw him standing there. "He wasn't looking at Serena," Martha said softly. "He was looking at you, and he wasn't crying. He wasn't fighting her." He took a sip of his wine. It was a 1996 Pinot Noir, a celebration vintage. The image sharpened in my mind, the way he swirled the glass, the relaxation in his shoulders as I walked into the dark, It wasn't the posture of a man under duress. It was the posture of a man who had just taken out the trash. He looked relieved, I whispered. I opened my eyes. The pity was gone. The little girl was gone. "You are lying," I said to the man on the floor. "You aren't sorry you did it. You are sorry the bomb didn't go off. You are sorry you got caught." "Lillian, please," he begged, grabbing my ankle. "I am your father." "No," I said, pulling my leg away. "You are a defendant." I looked at the security guard down the hall. "Remove him," Richard screamed. He screamed names I had never heard him use. He called me a traitor, a bitch, a snake. As the guards dragged him into the elevator, the mask fell away completely. There was no sadness left, only the vicious, snarling rage of a narcissist denied his supply. "You will rot," he screamed as the doors closed. "I made you. I can break you." The silence returned to the hallway. I stood there, shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of severing the final limb. "You did good," Martha said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "But that was the soft attack. That was the manipulation. Now comes the hard attack." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Serena and Richard rely on words," Martha said. "But Preston? Preston relies on impulses. And right now, he is alone. He is terrified. And he has access to his mother's medicine cabinet." She walked to the phone and dialed a number. "Unit 4, this is Galloway. Hold the perimeter. I want 2 men on the elevator landing and 2 on the fire escape, now." "You hired bodyguards?" I asked. "I hired a private security firm with the retainer from your trust," Martha said. "Former Navy SEALs. Because tonight, we are not dealing with white-collar criminals. We are dealing with a cornered rat." She was right. It happened at 2 a.m. We were trying to sleep. I was lying in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling, when the fire alarm shattered the night. The strobe lights in the room began to flash, and the ear-splitting siren wailed. "Do not move," Martha shouted from the living room. "Do not open the door. It is a false flag." I sat up, heart pounding. "But if there is a fire?" "There is no fire," Martha said. Rushing into my room, she was fully dressed. She hadn't slept at all. "He pulled the alarm in the lobby to unlock the magnetic seals on the stairwell doors. He is coming up." We heard running footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, chaotic footsteps. Then, a crash. Someone threw their body against our suite door. The heavy oak shuddered, but the deadbolt held. "Lillian!" It was Preston's voice. It was a guttural, wet roar. He sounded drunk, or high, or both. "Open the door. You think you can steal my money? You think you can ruin my life?" Thud. He hit the door again. Thud. "I am going to kill you," he screamed. "I am going to cut your throat." I scrambled out of bed, backing into the corner. This wasn't the polished villainy of my father. This was raw violence. "Unit 4, breach in the north corridor," Martha said into her phone. Her voice was ice cold. "Target is armed and hostile. Take him down." Outside the door, the chaos escalated. I heard the elevator ding. I heard the shout of professional voices. "Drop the weapon. Drop it now." "Come get some," Preston shrieked. There was a sound of a struggle, a scuffle of boots on carpet, the dull impact of flesh hitting the wall, and the metallic clatter of something falling to the floor. "Let me go! My dad owns this hotel! My dad owns you!" Preston was screaming, but his voice was muffled now, pressed against the floor. "Secure," a deep voice said through the door. "Target is neutralized. Police are inbound." Martha walked to the door and looked through the peephole. She nodded to me. "Put on your robe. Lillian, the police will want a statement." I tied the silk robe around my waist and walked to the door. My hands were steady. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open. The hallway was a tableau of ruin. Preston was pinned face down on the floral carpet. 2 large men in black tactical gear were holding him down, one with a knee in the center of his back. Preston's face was mashed sideways, his nose bleeding, his eyes wild and dilated, swimming in a haze of OxyContin and vodka. 3 feet away lay a knife. It wasn't a pocket knife. It was a 12-inch chef's knife from our kitchen at home. The blade caught the strobe light of the fire alarm, flashing like a warning beacon. He had brought a kitchen knife to a hotel to butcher his sister. The elevator doors opened again, and this time, it was the Aspen Police Department. Not Sheriff Miller. These were uniformed officers, followed closely by 2 men in suits, the detectives from the State Bureau. They didn't ask Preston if he was okay. They didn't ask who his father was. "Preston Fairbanks," one of the officers said, pulling Preston's arms behind his back and snapping the handcuffs on. The sound of the ratcheting metal was loud in the quiet hallway. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and breaking and entering." "You can't arrest me," Preston spat, blood spraying onto the carpet. "It is a family dispute. She is my sister." "It is a felony," the detective said, stepping over the knife. He looked at me. "Ms. Fairbanks, are you injured?" "No," I said. I looked at my stepbrother. I looked at the boy I had grown up with, the boy who used to steal my toys, who had grown into a man who tried to steal my life. "I am not injured, but I want to press charges, all of them. We are adding witness intimidation and violation of a protection order to the list," the detective said. He turned to the officers. "Get him out of here, and bag that knife." As they hauled Preston to his feet, he looked at me. The drugs were starting to wear off, replaced by the crushing reality of pain and consequences. "Dad is going to fix this," he mumbled. His speech slurred. "Dad always fixes it." "Dad is not fixing anything. Preston," I said. "Dad is next." I watched them drag him down the hall. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was just a dead weight, a piece of debris being cleared from the wreckage of the Fairbanks dynasty. Martha stepped out into the hall and stood beside me. She looked at the knife on the floor, then at the empty elevator. "The extinction burst," she said quietly. "It is ugly, isn't it?" "It is over," I said. "No," Martha corrected. "The danger is over. The violence is over. Now comes the law." She turned to the detective. "Officer, my client has already filed a federal complaint regarding financial fraud and conspiracy. This incident tonight confirms that the defendants are a physical threat to the witness. We are requesting that bail be denied for all parties." The detective nodded. "With a weapon like that? And a violation of a judge's order? He isn't going anywhere, and given the connection to the gas leak investigation, I think we have enough to pick up the parents tonight, too. Conspiracy to commit capital murder doesn't get bail." I leaned against the doorframe. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted. But it was a clean exhaustion. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating dread I had felt for years in that house. My father had tried to beg. My brother had tried to kill. They had thrown everything they had at me. Guilt, fear, violence, and I was still standing. "Go pack your bag, Martha," I said. "We are leaving?" "No," I said, looking down the hallway where the police were stringing up yellow crime scene tape. "We are going to the station. I want to be there when they bring Richard and Serena in. I want them to see me. I want them to know that it wasn't the blizzard that ended them. It wasn't the police. It was me." Martha smiled. It was the first time I had seen her smile with genuine warmth. "After you, Ms. Fairbanks," she said. We walked down the hall, past the stunned hotel guests peeking out of their doors, past the bloodstain on the carpet, and into the elevator. We were going down to the street, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was rising. The interrogation room at the Aspen Police Department was a windowless box painted a depressing shade of beige, smelling faintly of bleach and stale anxiety. Preston Fairbanks sat at the metal table, his hands cuffed to the bar bolted to the floor. The drugs had worn off, leaving him shivering, sweaty, and terrified. He did not look like the heir to a dynasty anymore. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was desperate to blame the cat. It took exactly 45 minutes for him to turn on his parents. I watched from behind the one-way mirror with Martha and Detective Reynolds. We could hear every word through the speaker system. Preston was not protecting the family legacy. He was bargaining for his life. "It was not my idea," Preston blubbered, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I just wanted to scare her. Mom said Serena said we needed to make sure Lillian could not come back. She drove me to the hardware store. She picked out the valve. She said if we messed with the heating, Lillian would have to leave the cabin and go to the shelter in town. I didn't know it would blow up. I swear." "And the jammer?" the interrogator asked, leaning back in his chair. "The signal jammer you bought to cut off her phone?" "Dad," Preston said. "That was Dad. Richard told me to buy the best one. He said he didn't want her calling for a taxi. He wanted her isolated. He said if she disappeared, the money problems would go away." "Did he use the word disappeared? Or died?" the interrogator pressed. Preston hesitated. He looked at the camera, his eyes wide and watery. "He said, liquidated. He said the problem needed to be liquidated," beside me. Martha let out a low, satisfied breath. "That is it. Conspiracy to commit capital murder. He just handed them the keys to the cell." The fallout was swift and brutal. At 6 a.m, a convoy of police vehicles, led by the State Bureau of Investigation, descended on the Fairbanks estate. Richard and Serena had returned there after being kicked out of the bank. Hiding behind the gates, likely shredding documents, but shredders are useless against a battering ram. We did not go to the house to watch. I did not need to see my childhood home raided. I saw it on the news. The local stations had helicopters in the air. They broadcast the footage live. I watched on the television in the hotel suite as Richard Fairbanks was led out of his front door. He was wearing his silk pajamas and a trench coat thrown hastily over his shoulders. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His head was bowed. He looked small. The arrogance that had defined his posture for my entire life had evaporated, leaving behind a frail, aging man who had gambled everything and lost. Serena was less dignified. She was screaming. 2 female officers had to drag her toward the cruiser as she kicked and spat, shouting that this was a mistake, that she was a victim, that I was a liar. It was a grotesque display, the final tantrum of a woman who had never been told no in her life. The charges were read out at the arraignment hearing 2 days later. I sat in the front row, wearing a new black suit, flanked by Martha and my team of lawyers. "The people of Colorado versus Richard Fairbanks and Serena Fairbanks," the judge announced. "Charges include conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, 3 counts of wire fraud, aggravated assault, obstruction of justice, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." The courtroom was packed. Every reporter, every socialite, every person Richard had ever snubbed or cheated was there. They wanted to see the blood in the water. Richard refused to look at me. He stared at the table, his face gray. Serena glared at me with such venom I could feel it burning my skin. But she remained silent, likely on the advice of the public defender appointed to her since their assets were frozen. The dismantling of their lives was methodical. It was not a battle, it was an accounting. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for Aspen theatrics, issued a ruling that severed the final tie. "Mr. Fairbanks, given the overwhelming evidence that you conspired to cause the death of your daughter for financial gain, this court is invoking the Slayer statute preemptively. You are stripped of all parental rights, guardianship, and any claim to the Fairbanks Legacy Trust. Furthermore, the court grants the motion to seize all personal assets to satisfy the debts owed to the Fairbanks Development Group and to provide restitution to the victim." I watched the gavel come down. It made a sharp, wooden crack that echoed through the room. That sound was the end of my childhood. It was the end of the fear. But the true victory happened in the quiet of the evidence room 3 weeks later. The forensic team had imaged every hard drive, every server, and every phone found in the house. Martha had been granted special access as a consultant for the prosecution to help untangle the financial web. She had spent days combing through terabytes of data. I found her in our temporary office, staring at a screen, her hand covering her mouth. She was crying. "Martha?" I asked, rushing over. "What is it? Did they hide the money?" She shook her head, unable to speak. She pointed at the monitor. It was an email chain from 7 years ago. The subject line was, "Project Clean Sweep." It was between Richard Fairbanks and the CEO of the corrupt textile company, the one Martha had been investigating when her life was destroyed. I read the text. "Richard, the auditor is getting too close. Galloway found the Cayman loop. If she testifies, we are both finished. You need to handle her. CEO." It is handled. We planted the funds in her account this morning. The anonymous tip to the police goes out at noon. She will be discredited by dinner time. Richard. Good. Make sure she never works again. I cannot have her looking at my books. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It wasn't just random bad luck. It wasn't just that Martha had stumbled onto a cartel. My father had been one of the architects of her destruction. He had helped frame her to protect his own embezzlement schemes. "He knew," Martha whispered, tears streaming down her face, cutting through the stoic mask she had worn for years. "He knew who I was. All this time I thought I was just collateral damage, but he ordered the hit." "He took your life," I said, the rage simmering in my chest. "He took your daughter. He took your name." I put my hand on her shoulder. "We have the email. Martha, we have the smoking gun." We took the file to the district attorney that afternoon. The reaction was immediate. The evidence was irrefutable. The conviction that had destroyed Martha's life was vacated within 48 hours. The Bar Association reinstated her license. The State Board of Accountancy issued a formal apology. Martha Galloway was no longer Mad Martha. She was a vindicated professional. She was a hero. The day her license arrived in the mail, she held the piece of paper for a long time. She didn't say anything. She just traced her name, Martha Galloway, CPA, with her fingertip, reclaiming her identity one letter at a time, with the criminal cases proceeding and the evidence overwhelming. The civil forfeiture moved quickly. The banks foreclosed on everything. The cars were sold. The jewelry was auctioned. The yacht was seized. And finally, the house, the Fairbanks estate, the sprawling stone mansion on the ridge, the place where I had grown up, where I had been ignored, where I had been packed into a suitcase and shoved out the door. It went up for auction on a gray Tuesday in March. It was a foreclosure sale, held on the steps of the county courthouse. Usually, these auctions attracted developers and bargain hunters. But for this property, the crowd was thin. The house had a stigma now. It was the scene of a conspiracy. It was the house where a father tried to kill his daughter. Superstition keeps prices down better than a recession. I stood in the back of the crowd, wearing a heavy wool coat and dark glasses. Martha stood next to me, holding a clipboard. "The opening bid is $3 million, the auctioneer announced. "Do I hear 3.5? Silence. The wind whipped around the columns of the courthouse. "3 million, a developer from Denver called out. 3.5, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the air. The developer turned to look at me. He recognized me. Everyone recognized me now. He lowered his hand. He knew better than to bid against the girl who had survived the fire. 3.5 million going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice? He looked at me. He knew who I was, too. Sold, he said, to Ms. Lillian Fairbanks. I signed the check. $3.5 million, a fraction of what the house was worth, a fraction of the money my father had stolen. We drove up there an hour later. The gate, the same iron gate that had slammed shut on my birthday, was open. The security system had been disabled. I walked up the driveway. The snow had melted, revealing the brown grass of early spring. The house loomed over us, dark and empty. The windows were like dead eyes. I walked to the front door. I didn't need a code. I had the keys now, all of them. I stepped into the foyer. It was cold. The heat had been turned off to save money during the seizure process. The furniture was gone, sold to pay creditors. The paintings were gone, leaving pale rectangles on the walls like ghosts of the art that had been there. It smelled of dust and neglect. The scent of roasted rosemary lamb and cedar polish was gone. I walked to the center of the room, to the spot where Serena had stood when she told me to leave. I looked up at the mezzanine, where my father had stood with his wine glass. "It is just a shell," Martha said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "It is just wood and stone." "It was a prison," I said, "and now it is mine." I walked up the stairs. I went to my father's bedroom. It was stripped bare. The bed was gone. The closet was empty. The safe in the wall was open and hollow. I went to my old room. It was exactly as I had left it. The police had not allowed anyone to touch it, treating it as part of the crime scene context. My books were still on the shelf. The bed was still unmade. The only difference was the dust. I stood by the window and looked out at the forest, toward the ridge where the cabin used to be. The wreckage had been cleared away by the investigators, leaving a scar of scorched earth in the trees. "Are you going to move back in?" Martha asked from the doorway. I turned around. I looked at this house, this monument to my father's ego, this place that was supposed to be a home but had been a stage for their cruelty. "No," I said. "I never want to sleep under this roof again." "Then why did you buy it?" "Because I didn't want a stranger living in my trauma," I said. "And because I have a better idea." I walked past her, out of the room, and down the grand staircase. I walked with a lightness I had never felt before. The heavy baggage of my childhood, the need for approval, the fear of abandonment, the confusion was gone. It had been replaced by the solid weight of ownership. We walked out the front door. Leaving the door unlocked, it didn't matter anymore. There was nothing inside worth stealing. We stood on the porch, looking at the view of the valley. Aspen glittered below us, a jewel box of lights. "They are in solitary confinement," Martha said, reading a notification on her phone. "Preston took a plea deal this morning. He is 20 years old. He testified against Richard. The DA is asking for life without parole for your father and 30 years for Serena." 20 years, I repeated. "I will be 38 when Preston gets out." "And you will be a different person then," Martha said. "You are already a different person now." "I am," I said. I looked at Martha. She looked younger. The haunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by the sharp, clear gaze of the woman she used to be, the woman she was again. "Thank you," I said, "for pulling me out of the snow." "Thank you," she replied, "for pulling me out of the past." I took a deep breath of the cold mountain air. It didn't bite anymore. It felt fresh. It felt like a blank page. "Come on," I said, heading toward the car. "We have work to do. This house isn't going to transform itself." "Transform into what?" Martha asked. I smiled, and for the first time since my birthday. The smile reached my eyes. "You will see," I said. "It is going to be the one thing my father hated most." "What is that?" "Useful," I said. "It is going to be useful. 6 months is a long time in the life of a house, but it is an eternity in the life of a girl who had to rebuild her entire world from scratch." The Fairbanks estate no longer smelled of cedar polish and expensive, suffocating silence. It smelled of roasting chicken, lemon floor cleaner, and the distinct, chaotic scent of 30 people living under one roof. The grand foyer, where my father had once stood with his wine glass and watched me leave, was now unrecognizable. The marble floors were covered in colorful foam puzzle mats. The abstract art that cost $50,000 had been replaced by finger paintings and crayon drawings taped to the walls with blue painter's tape. The crystal chandelier still hung there, but now it illuminated a group of toddlers building a fortress out of cardboard boxes. We did not call it the Fairbanks estate anymore. We called it the Haven. I stood on the second-floor balcony, the same spot where my father had stood on my 18th birthday. But I was not holding a glass of Pinot Noir. I was holding a basket of clean laundry. I looked down at the activity below. Women were sitting in the living room. Women who had fled abusive husbands. Women who had lost their jobs and their homes. Women who had been told by society that they were invisible. They were talking, drinking tea, and for the first time in a long time, they were safe. "Inventory is finished," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Martha. She looked healthier than I had ever seen her. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out, and her hair, once matted and gray, was now a sleek silver bob. She wore a sensible cardigan and held a tablet with the air of a general commanding an army. She was not just the financial manager of the Haven, she was its heartbeat. She was the aunt I never had, the mother I had lost, and the partner I needed. "How are we looking?" I asked, setting the laundry basket down. "Donations are up 20% this month," Martha said, tapping the screen. "The story of the Blizzard heiress still has legs in the media. People like a redemption arc, but the heating bill is going to be high. The insulation in the West Wing is terrible. Your father cared more about aesthetics than thermal efficiency." "Fix it," I said. "We have the budget." "I already called the contractors." Martha smiled. "They start on Monday. And Lillian? Maya needs you in the library. She is struggling with her college application essay." Maya was 17. She had arrived 3 weeks ago, shivering and terrified. With a backpack full of dirty clothes and a black eye, she reminded me so much of myself that sometimes it hurt to look at her. "I will go down in a minute," I said. Martha stepped closer and looked at me. Her sharp eyes softened. "It is snowing, Lillian." I stiffened. I hadn't looked out the window yet today. I walked to the glass doors and looked out at the valley. The sky was a heavy, bruised gray. The first flakes of winter were falling, swirling in the wind, coating the brown earth in a layer of pristine white. It was beautiful, but it made the scar tissue on my heart ache. It was almost exactly 1 year ago. The weather was identical. The cold was identical. "He is out," Martha said softly. I didn't need to ask who she meant. "I know," I said. "The lawyer called me this morning. His bail was reduced because his assets are frozen and he has no flight risk. He couldn't afford a private attorney to argue the flight risk motion, so the public defender dragged it out for 6 months, but he is out pending trial." "He has nowhere to go," Martha said. "Serena is still inside. Her bail was denied because of the flight risk, but Richard is on the street." "He has friends," I said, though I didn't believe it. "He has the country club crowd." "He has nobody," Martha corrected. "Men like Richard do not have friends. They have associates. And associates do not let indicted felons sleep on their Italian leather sofas." I looked at the snow. I remembered the feeling of the wind cutting through my coat. I remembered the numbness in my fingers. I remembered the terrifying realization that the person who was supposed to protect me had decided I was expendable. "It does not matter," I said, turning away from the window. "He is the past. We have dinner to serve." The evening moved with the comforting rhythm of the shelter. We served stew and crusty bread in the dining room. I sat with Maya and helped her outline her essay, talking about resilience, about how the worst things that happen to us can become the foundation of who we become. I felt strong. I felt useful. Then, at 8 o'clock, the intercom buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the murmur of conversation in the dining hall. It was the gate buzzer, the main gate. "I will get it," Martha said, standing up. "No," I said, putting my hand on her arm, a cold feeling, familiar and heavy, settled in my stomach. "I will get it." I walked to the security room, a small office off the kitchen that we had retrofitted with modern monitors. I sat in the chair and looked at the screen. The camera feed was high definition, crisp and clear even in the low light of the snowstorm. A figure was standing outside the iron gates. He was wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather. A cheap polyester thing that looked like it had come from a donation bin. He was shivering violently. His hair, once dyed a rich chestnut, was now completely white and overgrown. He looked old. Not distinguished old, but withered old. It was Richard Fairbanks. He pressed the buzzer again. He looked into the camera, his eyes wide and watery. He looked exactly like the homeless people he used to sneer at from the window of his limousine. I pressed the talk button. I did not turn on the video feed from my end. I wanted him to hear me, not see me. "Who is it?" I asked. My voice was calm. It did not shake. "Lillian?" His voice was a crackled rasp over the speaker. "Lily? Is that you?" "Who is it?" I repeated. "It is Dad." He choked out. He grabbed the iron bars of the gate, his knuckles white. "Lily, please, you have to let me in. It is freezing out here. I have nowhere to go. They took everything. My cards, my house. I have been walking for hours." I watched him on the screen. I watched the snow piling up on his shoulders. I watched the way his body shook. "This is a shelter for women and children," I said. "We do not accept single men." "I am not a man," he cried, his voice breaking. "I am your father. Lillian, look at the weather. I could die out here. You cannot leave me out here. I raised you." "You raised me until I cost too much," I said. "And then you sent me out into this same weather with a suitcase and a death sentence." "I am sorry," he wailed. He sank to his knees in the snow, mirroring the position I had been in a year ago when I begged him to look at me. "I am sorry, okay? I admitted it. I lost everything. Isn't that enough? Do you want me to freeze to death? Is that what you want? You are not a murderer. Lillian, you are a good girl. You are my good girl." I looked at the monitor. I saw the image of my own face from a year ago superimposed over his. I felt the phantom pain of the cold. I felt the desperate, clawing hope that someone would save me. For a moment, the guilt flared. It was the old conditioning, deep and primal. He is your father. He is blood. You cannot let him die. But then I remembered the gas valve. I remembered the email to the hitman about Martha. I remembered the look of relief on his face when the gate closed. He was not asking for shelter because he loved me. He was asking for shelter because he had used up everyone else. He was a parasite looking for a new host. "You are right, Richard," I said, my voice echoing through the speaker and out into the snowy night. "I am not a murderer. I am not you." He looked up, hope flooding his face. "Then open the gate, please, baby, just for one night." "I am not a murderer," I continued, "but I am also not a victim anymore. You are standing in front of the haven. This place is a sanctuary for people who have been broken by the world. It is for the innocent." I leaned closer to the microphone. "You are not a victim. Richard, you are the architect of your own misery. You built this night, brick by brick, lie by lie. You bought the cold you are feeling right now. It is the only thing you own." "Lillian!" he screamed. "I am your father." "I have no father," I said. "My father died the night he chose money over my life." I looked down at the control panel. There was a large green button that said "Open," and there was a red switch that said "Lockdown." I reached out. My hand was steady. My skin was warm. "Goodbye, Richard." I flipped the red switch. Clack! The sound of the heavy magnetic locks engaging echoed through the speaker. It was a dry, final sound. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of a life ending. Richard threw himself against the gate, screaming my name. But the sound was already fading. I turned the volume knob on the console all the way down to 0. On the screen, he was just a silent, thrashing ghost in the snow. I watched him for one more second. I did not feel joy. I did not feel triumph. I felt a profound, quiet lightness. The tether that had bound me to him, the heavy chain of obligation and trauma, had finally snapped. I stood up. I turned off the monitor. The screen went black. I walked out of the security room. The hallway was warm. It smelled of dinner. I could hear the sound of silverware clinking on plates and the low hum of voices. I walked into the dining room. Martha looked up from the head of the table. She saw my face. She didn't ask what happened. She knew. She simply nodded, a small, proud smile touching her lips. "Is everything secure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Everything is secure. I walked over to the table. There was an empty chair next to Maya. She looked up at me, her eyes bright and hopeful. Lillian, Maya said, I think I figured out the ending to my essay. I want to say that the winter doesn't last forever, that eventually. You have to choose to be the summer. I sat down. I picked up my fork. I looked around the room at the women and children eating, safe and warm in the house that was built to exclude them. That is a beautiful ending, Maya, I said. Outside, the snow fell harder, burying the driveway, burying the footprints, burying the man at the gate. The world outside was white and cold and unforgiving, but in here, the fire was roaring. I took a bite of the bread. It was warm, and for the first time in 18 years, so was I. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you found it as satisfying to hear as it was for me to tell. It has been a journey from the freezing cold of Aspen to the warmth of justice. And I am so glad you walked this path with Lillian and me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a snowy city like Aspen, or somewhere warm and tropical? Please leave a comment below and let me know. I love reading through them and seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate redemption, please make sure to subscribe to BitterSweet Drama Stories. Don't forget to hit the like button on this video, and if you really loved it, smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little bit of justice in their day. Stay warm, stay safe, and I will see you in the next story.